things are looking up. Your business is growing. So what's your next step? A bigger office? A new supplier? Your next big contract overseas? Your business has growing needs. You'll need more support, more flexibility, more resources, and a bank that makes it their business to help expand your business. Welcome to Business Banking with HSBC. All our experience and expertise brought right to you so that you and your business can take the next step. You'll have support from a dedicated relationship manager and access to our global network of experts. The flexibility to manage your finances across multiple devices. International accounts all on one platform. And much more. So choose Business Banking with HSBC and take your next step.
Hello and welcome back to the 7th Annual Indonesia Economic Forum. We've had a full day of discussion, some very insightful comments and observations about the state of the world today in terms of how geopolitically, economically, the world is adapting to the post-COVID world. We have now with us Professor David Autor, Ford Professor of Economics at the MIT's Department of Economics. Professor Autor, welcome to the 7th Indonesia Economic Forum. It's a pleasure to have you. Dr. David Autor, Professor David Autor is going to be talking a little bit about the future of work. One of the key disruptions in the COVID-19 era has been how work has been disrupted in ways unimaginable prior to COVID-19. Today, we are very much used to working from home, studying from home. Global supply chains have been altered to deal with this change. Professor Autor is an expert on labor economics, and he has done deep research on how the world will change and how the nature of work is changing. Professor Autor, welcome to the Indonesia Economic Forum.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yes, you are. It's very early for you in Boston, Massachusetts.
That is correct. Yes, it's 4 a.m. here. So if I seem a little hazy, that hopefully will be the explanation.
That's all right. Well, we really appreciate you, taking this time to be with us. It's an honor to have you at our forum, and we hope that we can have a lively discussion. You have a presentation to make, so I'll hand over the floor to you in terms of your presentation, after which we will have a nice and a lively debate.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, I'll speak for about 20 minutes, I hope, and then I will be delighted to have a discussion. So let's see, I'm hoping you can see my slides, and
Yes.
I'm just going to say next to advance each slide, and there are many advances, so I'll be saying next many times.
Sure.
Oh, great. And so I'm going to talk to you about envisioning the future of work. And to do so, it's useful to start a little bit with the history of work. So we can have the next slide, please. Great. So if you think about many of the great inventions of the last 200 years, they were designed specifically to save labor. So the tractor was invented to replace human muscle power with machine power. The assembly line was created to take inaccurate artisanal labor and turn it into precise factory labor, mass production labor. Next, please. And the digital computer was created to replace cumbersome, error-prone human calculation with machine perfection. And these inventions have worked. We no longer dig ditches by hand. We don't pound tools out of wrought iron, and we don't do bookkeeping using actual books. So we have succeeded in replacing an enormous amount of labor with machinery. Next, please. And yet, if you look in the US and most industrialized and developing countries, the fraction of adults working in the paid labor force has risen for about most of the century. So if you look in the United States, for example, the employment rates of men and women combined are much higher in 2015 than they were in 1890. And that raises an interesting question, which is, why is there still so much work to do, given how good we have gotten at automating the work we used to do, and how do we understand that process? I'm going to suggest there are three answers that are part of that, and I'm going to focus on one of them in particular. So let me go through the first answers that I think will be familiar to everybody. One is that automation makes us richer, and because it makes us richer, it has the effect of increasing our consumption. When people get richer, they buy bigger houses, they pay for healthcare, they send their children to school, they travel, they invest in luxuries, and so they consume more, and that creates more work for people to do. That's one answer. A second answer, and I think this is even more profound, is that automation doesn't just eliminate work. It makes workers more productive in the tasks that are not automated. So if we think about craftsmen using pneumatic nail guns to hang sheetrock or shingles, or doctors using batteries of tests to make diagnoses, or architects rapidly rendering designs on their computers, or teachers delivering lessons through telepresence, or long-haul truckers who are using cloud-based dispatching platforms to increase the efficiency of their loads. In all these cases, when we automate, we do eliminate some human tasks, but simultaneously, we improve our tools, and those make us more valuable and more productive in the tasks that remain. So that's a second answer, is that automation just doesn't just replace us, it also complements us. But now let me turn to the third part that I think relates so closely to the future of the work. So next slide, please. The process of innovation is not simply the process of eliminating work through machines and through technology, but also of creating new work. So this figure shows you, and I'll walk through this, the invention of new work over an 80-year period. So this reflects a joint work with my co-author Anna Salamans of Utrecht University in the Netherlands and a PhD student at MIT, Brian C. Miller. And it shows you that more than 60% of the work done in the year 2018 had not yet been invented in 1940. Let me explain what I mean by that. So first, turn your attention to these dark blue bars. This shows you the distribution of all employment in the United States in 1940 across 12 occupations that comprise all jobs altogether, and they're ranked from roughly lowest to highest paid. So for example, the lowest is farming and mining, then personal services, then let's say construction, production work, office work like clerical work, and finally technical, professional, and managerial work. So you can see in 1940 that a little less than 20% of all employment was in farming, and a little bit less than 30% of all employment was in production. So those two categories constituted half the jobs. Now fast forward 80 years later, 78 years later to 2018. And you can see that actually only a few percentage points of employment is in farming and mining. Less than 10 percentage points is in production. And a lot of work actually is in professional, technical, and managerial work, and also in clerical and office work. However, now if you look at the light green bars, that shows you the work that is in occupations that didn't exist, that existed in 1940. The red bars show you the remainder that's work that has been created since then, jobs that did not exist. So for example, 75% of all professional jobs are new since 1940, or 43% of all managerial jobs, or 67% of all clerical jobs, or even 70% of all personal services. So now let me explain where that comes from. So if I can have the next slide, please. What does new work look like? So to answer this question, what my co-authors and I did was we used historical data from the US Census Bureau. So the Census Bureau each year in the United States, since the founding of the country, is required to take a complete enumeration of all residents of the United States. In addition to asking them, their age and their sex, it also asks them what they do for a living. And so they write down their occupation. The Census Bureau records those, and then as a coding aid for the workers at the Census Bureau, they kind of create a catalog of all the occupations that people list so they can sort of categorize them. And when a bunch of people list an occupation they haven't previously heard of, they add it to the catalog. So by comparing these catalogs decade on decade, you can see the new work that is emerging. You can also see, by the way, some of the occupations that go away. So if I can have the next slide, please. So you would tend to think that most of the new work, I think most people have this intuition, is work that involves, creating the new technology, adapting the new technology, installing the new technology, or selling the new technology. That's a natural intuition that all new work is technology work. And there's evidence that some of that is true. So if I can have the next slide, please. An important category of jobs are what we call frontier jobs. These are high-tech jobs. So for example, in 1940, those are welding machine operators. In 1950, those are airplane designers. In 1960, those are textile chemists. You can keep going through those. In 1970, computer software engineers. 1980, remote vehicle pilots. Then certified medical technicians, ethnocardiographers, which are basically heart doctors, wind turbine technicians, and pediatric vascular surgeons. So there's a lot of new work that is being added. And notice these are expert jobs. These are jobs that require a set of skills and expertise that didn't previously exist. There were no wind turbine technicians before there were wind turbines. There were no remote vehicle pilots before we had a technology for remotely controlling aircraft. And these are deep skills. They are skills that require people to specialize. There are many, many more types of doctors now than there were 70 years ago because there's so much more medical knowledge. Next slide, please. However, not all new work is technology work. I mentioned that as we get more productive, we get wealthier. And as we get wealthier, we spend more money on luxuries, entertainment, and enjoyment. So if I go to the next slide. A lot of new work actually are what we call wealth work. So for example, in 1940, gambling dealers, people who worked in gaming houses, beauticians in 1950, directors of pageants, performances in 1960, mental health counselors in 1970 dealing with overconsumption, people who did gift wrapping for a living in 1980, fingernail formers, that's a former beautician in 1990, horse exercisers if you don't have time to exercise your own horse, oyster preparers at restaurants, sommeliers, and perhaps anticipating the President Trump's election 2016 golf cart mechanics. Okay, next slide, please. Finally, a third category of jobs are what we call last mile jobs. These are jobs that involve some process or activity that is being automated away, but some small piece of it remains. So if I can have the next slide, please. So for example, in 1980, one job that you would find are what we call tamale machine feeders, people who just feed these pieces of food into a machine that fries them. Then vending machine attendants, people who put food into other machines that the machines then sell the food. People who monitor chat rooms and host chat rooms and host them. people who locate underground utility cables that have not been accurately mapped. And finally, teleprompters, people who hold up signs telling you what to say on TV. I don't have a teleprompter in front of me, for example. Good. Next slide, please. So those sort of give you a sense that when we look over the course of time, lots of new work is emerging. Some of it, a lot of it is in these technical, professional, and managerial jobs. And that's important to understand where the nature or the content of work is changing over time. But there's also new personal services, new types of office work, and lots of new health work. And these have a mixture of a technology component, but also a kind of a wealth component, even a mixture of things that are disappearing, but creating new work as they go because they create a new temporary specialty. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now I've been talking about the work of the past and how we got to the present. So let me just say a few words about some of the technologies that are right in front of us. And here I'm drawing on, for the last 2.5 years, I've been leading at MIT, the MIT Work of the Future Task Force. And this is an interdisciplinary group. We actually have 20 faculty members looking at various aspects of technology and how they are affecting the labor market and changing the way we do what we do. And a summary term we use for these, and I think this is appropriate, is we call them momentous changes that are unfolding gradually. In other words, they're incredibly important, but they're not happening overnight. So next slide, please. So to take a first example, next frame, autonomous vehicles. You've of course all heard a great deal about autonomous vehicles, and they are coming and they are really important, but they're coming slowly. Even if a perfect autonomous vehicle were invented today, it would be 10 to 15 to 20 years before it was fully deployed. Why is that? Well, in general, new technologies often are astounding, but it can take decades from the birth of an invention to its commercialization, to its assimilation into business processes, its standardization, widespread adoption, and eventually its broader impact on the labor force. Autonomous vehicles are coming slowly for one reason is because driving is just really hard. So it's not possible at the moment to have vehicles that are as adaptive as human drivers. Two, even if those machines were here, the installed base of vehicles is so large and so valuable that you wouldn't just scrap it and start again overnight. And in the interim, a lot of what vehicle autonomy does now is not replace drivers, but supplements drivers. It helps them be more attentive, to correct for errors that they might make or overlook. And in general, the autonomy in vehicles at this point is a complement to human drivers, not a substitute for them, as has been the case in commercial aircraft for many decades, where slowly the autonomous systems have improved, but they have not eliminated pilots so far. They've made them much safer. Take another example, additive manufacturing. Additive manufacturing is, of course, a term that's opposite to traditional manufacturing, what we call extractive manufacturing. Excuse me, subtractive, which generally means you take a piece of material like a piece of metal or a piece of wood or a piece of plastic, and you remove parts of it until you get the thing that you want. Additive manufacturing is the opposite, where you effectively print a manufactured object like you were doing with a printer, except you print it in 3 dimensions. This is a profoundly important idea. It's going to change the way things are designed, the way they're prototyped. In the long run, manufacturing will be mostly a digital process where things live in the digital world until the final moment of production. They are mostly an idea, a piece of information that's recorded, and only the physical component of that object only becomes physical just as it is completed. So it's a really big idea, and it's going to change manufacturing from much less of a labor-intensive process and much more into a cognitively intensive computational engineering process. Not that it isn't already that, but even more so. But again, this is quite a long way off. It is right now very specialized. It is used for prototyping more than large-scale manufacturing. For example, an interesting application is that some auto manufacturers like Porsche, they no longer produce pieces of vehicles from older models. If someone needs a part from an older car that they no longer make, they actually print it using additive manufacturing rather than stocking the old ones. So it's a big deal, coming slowly. Third, industrial robotics. You've all heard a great deal about robots. Robots are quite important. You see them a lot in automobile assembly. They're not that important elsewhere yet. They mostly have not left their cages where they work in assembly plants. And the reason are severalfold. One is, of course, they're not very adaptable like people are. They're not flexible. They are often dangerous, or if they're not dangerous, they're slow. And most importantly, actually, this is something we discovered in the process of our work, is they're extremely difficult to program. Most robots, although a robot in theory is a multi-purpose machine, most of the time when they're used in industry, they are purchased, they are programmed to do one thing. And when that thing is no longer needed, the robots are discarded because they're too hard to reprogram. And so people just actually buy a new robot and hire a integrator to use that, to develop, to program that robot to do that thing they want to do again. So again, coming slowly. Intelligent supply chains. This is something we also say a lot. You can think of supply chains nowadays as being a kind of a dispersed robot that involves warehouses, trucks, conveyor belts and sorters, software and people. And there's been enormous innovation here as much of, as supply has moved from going from shipping large boxes from one business to another to shipping small boxes from businesses to consumers. But what's amazing right now is, although this is an area of substantial automation, it's actually added millions and millions of workers throughout the industrialized world as more people have piled into warehouses to feed the e-commerce universe. Finally, artificial intelligence. This again is very important. And unlike the examples above, artificial intelligence is the one technology that actually is more likely to replace highly skilled, cognitively intensive tasks than it is to replace physically demanding tasks. Again, it's coming. It will be really important, and it's coming slowly. So in all these cases, what I want to emphasize is that these are momentous technologies. They will change the way we work, and we need to have the right skills to use them. However, there is not that the sky is falling. One way to say it is it's gradually lowering overnight, and so we need to be prepared for that. Good, next slide, please. So I've told you, that technology eliminates work and creates new work, and that it's not happening overnight. So does that mean that the process will take care of itself, that there's nothing to worry about? And the answer is no. That is not my message. The challenge is not running out of work, but using rising productivity effectively. So if I can have the next slide, please. Take the example of two oil-rich countries, Norway and Saudi Arabia. I mention these countries because they're both rich because they both have access to oil. It's like they have money coming out of a hole in the ground. But these countries have not been equally successful in turning their material prosperity into human prospering. Norway is a thriving democracy where people generally work and play hard together. It's usually ranked between 4th and 1st in national happiness. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy where many citizens lack a path for personal achievement, advancement, and its ranking in national happiness is about 35th, which is low for such a wealthy country. The difference between these countries is not their technologies, nor their wealth per se, it's their institutions. Norway has invested in its citizens to foster opportunity and economic mobility. Saudi Arabia has raised living standards while frustrating many other human strivings. Both countries are rich, but they're not equally well off. And how does this example relate to work? Well, and automation and new technology? Well, like oil riches, automation creates wealth by allowing people to do more work in less time. But how we use that time and that prosperity or that wealth is not preordained. It's not decided by the machines or by the market. It is up to people and the institutions that they create to channel rising productivity into opportunity or not. So if I can have the next slide, please. And this brings us to a problem that is faced by much of the industrialized world right now, which is a great divergence between rising productivity and the incomes of the kind of typical worker. So this figure shows you for the United States, the growth of productivity and compensation between 1948 and 2018. And productivity per hour, that top line, has grown a lot. It hasn't grown as fast over the last 40 years as it did in the immediate post-war decades, but it's grown considerably. Average compensation has also risen pretty much in lockstep with productivity, but median compensation has not. The typical worker has seen very little of the productivity growth that has occurred since the late 1970s. And that's true in many rich countries. And what that means is that inequality is rising a great deal. So although countries are becoming more productive, the benefits of that productivity are not filtering down very far. Next slide, please. Why is that? Well, it has many causes, many of them are institutional, but let me point to one important one, which is the nature of job growth. If we look at the labor market in many industrialized countries, it looks increasingly like a barbell with increasing poundage on either end of the bar. On the one hand, on the right hand of the bar, we see a lot of growth of professional and technical and managerial work. On the left-hand side of the bar, we see a lot of growth of low-paid personal services, food service, cleaning, entertainment, recreation, security, home health care. What's missing, of course, what's going away is a lot of these production and clerical, administrative support and sales jobs. It's not mysterious what's going on there. Many of those jobs can increasingly be codified in computer software and executed by machines. But this process, of course, knocks out rungs in the job ladder, kind of potentially shrinks the size of the middle class and makes it harder for people to go from rags to riches. So if I can have the next figure. Next slide, please. This shows you that process in the United States, where employment growth has polarized between high-paying, high-education jobs like technical, professional, managerial, and relatively low-paying personal services, cleaning, and labor jobs. And these middle-paid, middle-education jobs have been contracting. So next figure, please. So let me close by trying to put these pieces together. I've talked about one, all the new work that's being created, two, the economic challenges. So if I can have the next figure, please. What this figure shows you is the relationship between GDP in a country in 1960 and the growth rate of GDP over the next 50 years between 1960 and 2011. And so what you can see is, for example, in 1960, the US was almost the richest country on this list, followed by a lot of Europe. And then you see the developing world on the left. And then what the y-axis shows you is that less wealthy countries tend to grow faster. And that's a natural process because they can adopt a lot of the innovations and technologies that are being created in the rich world and use them for their own purposes. So making good choices that allows them to grow faster. Richer countries tend to grow more slowly because they can't ride anyone else's coattails. They need to create their own new technologies to advance. And on this figure, the United States is exactly where you would expect it to be. It has not grown faster or more slowly than you would have anticipated, given how wealthy it was 50 years ago. So it says a lot of the growth process is just a matter of making good decisions and allowing the trajectory of adoption technology and complementary institutions to allow countries to grow. And so it's not a magical process, it's one of making good choices. However, if I can see the next slide, please, even within given levels of growth and economic development, there are big differences across countries in both inequality and mobility. So let me say what I mean by that. The x-axis in this figure shows you the measure of inequality, the Gini coefficient, which is a measure of the concentration of income. So on the left-hand side, the most equal countries are the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland. If you want to see a highly unequal industrialized economy, look to the United States. If you want to see a country that's more unequal than the United States, you primarily have to go to the developing world, China, Peru, Brazil, Chile, Argentina. So some countries are much more unequal than others, even at given levels of income. The y-axis of this figure shows you essentially earnings immobility, the likelihood, the predictability of a child's income in adulthood based on the income of his or her parent 30 years earlier. And what you can see is countries that are more unequal have lower mobility. In other words, the income of a parent is much more determinative of the income of a child decades later. So in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, there's very little relationship between what a child earns and what his or her parents earned a decade earlier, meaning that there's lots of mobility. People are going to go often from rags to riches and vice versa. In the United States, it's actually the opposite. family income is highly, highly predictive of children's income. And you can think of that as an economic failure because it means that the society is not creating lots of pathways to opportunity. And so this is not a function, again, of technology. It's a function, or of markets per se, it's a function of the institutions that support opportunities, support investment, support skills that allow people to invest and change their, create their own opportunities in the course of their adulthoods. So if we can move forward to the next slide, please. So to conclude, I just want to emphasize the points that I've made, and then I welcome your questions. So next slide, please. When we think of the work of the future, I want to make a number of points that I've made all along, so I'm just gathering them together here. One is that we're losing work and gaining work simultaneously. Technology is eliminating jobs, but it's creating new works, new jobs simultaneously. We invent those. These changes are momentous. They're incredibly important, but they're occurring gradually. The world is not turned on its head overnight. It takes often decades for these things to occur, and that's good because it gives us an opportunity to prepare for them and to use them well. The new work that's created is typically not the same as the old work that is eliminated. New work tends to be much more cognitively intensive, skill intensive, and also interpersonal skill intensive, such that we need to keep educating ourselves, raising the level of education generation over generation to make ourselves highly complementary to the technologies that we are creating. So new skills, education, and training are essential, and investing in those things has never been more important, although it's been important for quite a long time. Equally essential are the institutions that channel rising productivity into opportunity. That involves education, that involves good laws, lack of corruption, excellent governance, infrastructure, and a meritocracy that allows people to take advantage of the possibilities that we are creating. And so the challenge and the opportunity of the present is to build the work of the future, to invent work and invent the institutions that support it, to create a future that is one that we all want to live in. I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That was fantastic. It was really insightful. I think you took us through, you gave us an historic lesson, I think, in terms of how work has changed for over the last 7 decades. Now, I think as we wait for questions from participants, I'd just like to ask you a few questions to start off the conversation. For many emerging countries like Indonesia, one of the biggest challenges facing the government, of course, is creating jobs. And in the past, what has happened is, of course, the quickest way to create jobs is low-skilled jobs, and plentiful of those jobs, right? Whether it's in manufacturing, very low-end processing type of jobs.
Right.
As you project forward, and as you said, jobs are continuously changing. What would be, what would these governments, how should these governments be thinking about the types of jobs they should be creating for the people that are going to join the labor force 5-10 years down the road, or even in the next, in the next 3, 4, 5 years?
Sure, absolutely. So I think it's a tough question always. The first thing I would say is that giving people skills helps create the work, right? So the skills that people have, they create opportunity themselves. They often create indigenous activities based on their own creativity and expertise. So investing in skills is almost always the kind of fertile soil on which good jobs grow. Okay? Second, not all jobs, of course, are export jobs. Many jobs will involve domestic services, tourism, and things that make the country an attractive place to visit and also to set up businesses. A third is that I do think that the sort of future of low-end manufacturing is not that bright. That we are there are many more things that will become automated over time, and so that increases the importance of focusing on work that you continue to add value in, and that generally will require both human expertise as well as a set of institutions and infrastructure that support that type of work. That means, good governance, a reasonable taxation policy, and of course the infrastructure of electrification and roads and good legal systems that allow for building.
Right.
And of course, Indonesia is well situated, right? In the neighborhood it's in has lots of opportunity and lots of demand, and will be a continued center of growth, throughout the 21st century. So in many ways, Indonesia has a lot of assets, both in terms of its institutions, in terms of its natural resources, in terms of its population, and its geographic location to take advantage of those opportunities.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the opportunities are great for Indonesia. We have a few questions coming in from our participants. Mr. Sachin Gopalan, who is the co-founder of the Indonesia Economic Forum.
Great.
Yeah. So he's asking really in terms of how work from home has changed, especially in terms of how the pandemic has impacted office workers, primarily who can now work from home, right? How would this evolve going forward in terms of the future of work?
Good, that's a great question. So yeah, my colleagues and I on the Work the Future Task Force, we like to refer to this we call it telepresence, the idea that you can be present somewhere without being physically there. And that term telepresence actually comes from my colleague David Mindell, who's one of the co-leaders of the Work of the Future Task Force, and he coined it in terms of undersea exploration. David is, in addition to being a historian, is an engineer, and one of the things he engineered early in his career was remotely controlled submarines that were used for deep sea exploration. And when the idea was first formed, people thought, oh no, you can't really, that can't work. You're not going to see what you need to see. You're not physically there. You won't feel, you won't be present. But of course, it turns out that you don't need to be physically present at the bottom of the sea. You just need to have eyes and ears at the bottom of the sea. And in fact, you're better off not to be there, because to support life in that hostile environment, it limits what you can do with a submarine, how deep it can go, how small it can be, how long it can be under there. And you could do better work telepresently than you could do physically present. Telepresence is a form of automation. It's a way of automating it allows you to be in a place without going to a place. And that's going to have all kinds of repercussions. So one thing, of course, it's going to do is it's going to change the demand for many types of services, right? If people, and surely this will be true, if they physically commute less to their offices and telecommute more, of course, they're not going to, stop for coffee at gas stations along the way. They're not going to go out to restaurants at night downtown next to their offices. More importantly, in terms of business travel, right? The hospitality industry is absolutely enormous, right? A year or two ago, I would have been in Jakarta to give this talk, or I wouldn't have been able to, I wouldn't have done it, much as I would like to be in Jakarta. But increasingly, we will expect that people will not make those trips. They will instead do them telepresently. And that's going to change the entire economic activity around high-end travel. So that's going to have an important repercussion. And then the challenge is whether creative work, idea work, can be done successfully in this environment or not. Historically, we found that people need to sort of cram in together to do creative work. That's where innovation occurs. And that's why cities have been so economically important, because it seems like people are more productive when they're all kind of sharing ideas and looking at the same things. And we don't know how that's going to evolve. But the thing that makes it different is moving to telepresence was not just an individual decision. It's a coordination problem, right? It wouldn't be possible for one person to simply say, hey, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to use Zoom. So everybody else, whenever you want to talk to me, you put a big TV set on your wall and you just turn it on and there I am, right? That would not have worked. We need to all agree simultaneously to make this move. But now that we've made it, we won't unmake it. The telepresent world is here, got here in a hurry, and it's not going to go away. And so we need to, it's going to change the way we consume and the way we travel, the way we do our work, and we're going to have to get better at it. I think we will.
Right. Yeah. So I think really, like you said, the behavioral changes that have been basically, enforced on us through because of the
That's
pandemic.
right. That's
They're
right.
here to stay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, the pandemic has generally been what we call an automation forcing event, right? It's caused us to change the way we do many things, and you become even more dependent upon our technology very quickly. We would have gotten here, but it could have taken 5 to 10 more years to be where we are right now.
Right. There are a couple of other questions coming in. Some refer to the gig economy, in terms of digitalization, and Indonesia really has a relatively young population, very upwardly mobile, very tech savvy. The problem with Indonesia is that we are consumers of technology rather than producers of technology. There isn't much innovation going on in terms of production of new technology or new ideas in the tech space, right? How, you are at MIT, one of the leading institutions in the world for engineers and technology players, right? How does Indonesia kind of, kind of change its education system to produce more tech-savvy people going forward, so that they can be contributors and producers of technology rather than just consumers?
Well, so first let me say, I doubt that they're really only consumers, right? Because usually, even when you take a technology from another country, the way that you adapt it in your own country is distinctive.
Right.
Right. So the way that, I know that like gig economy work is done in Indonesia is different. And in fact, in many cases, I believe is more, is even more prevalent than it is used in a lot of other countries. So it's not the case. So there is a lot of indigenous innovation, typically surrounding even the adoption of a technology. So a technology, you don't just open in the box and use it, right? It's almost always the case that you have to integrate it in society. So for example, like take the example of M-Pesa in Kenya, right? M-Pesa is a way of banking on a mobile phone. Right? We don't have that in the United States, not in that form. It didn't make sense. It was an idea that was created because it made sense for that country, even though it used the technological infrastructure that came from, the developed world. So I think, I don't think, and feel free to disagree with me, and I mean no offense here. I don't think it should be the goal of every country to be at the frontier of innovation of those specific technologies. However, having homegrown expertise allows you to adapt them and use them in creative ways that are beneficial for you, and then may be picked up elsewhere as well. So there is enormous value in investing in those skills and education and the infrastructure that supports it. I don't think the goal needs to be, we want to be the next Intel or the next Apple or the next Alibaba per se, right? But having the savvy to use technology well means that you will adapt it and adapt it successfully and creatively in a way that makes sense for the conditions, for the needs of the country in the time and place.
Right. I may also kind of take that question forward. Here we are. You are speaking to us from Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts. We are in Jakarta, and this is made possible because of technology and the ability to connect through Zoom. Now, do you think that infrastructure development and investment, especially if we are going to be doing more work from home or more, not just work from home, remote working, right? Whether you're a remote airplane pilot or whether you are going to sit at home and, you could envision sitting at home and running a machine in a factory, right? Sometime down the road, you could do that. And that would actually require a lot of investment in what we call the digital infrastructure.
Yeah.
And that investment and that itself will create a lot of jobs that we don't envision today. Would you say that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It will create new work because it creates new possibility. But more than that, it does massively increase kind of national productivity. So there's actually evidence on this There's a really terrific study by some economists at Columbia, Johannes Hjort is one of them, where you look at the building of the digital undersea cables that connected various countries at different times to the internet. And when countries connect, they actually grow faster. So there's really incredible evidence on this, that digital infrastructure is an incredibly valuable investment. It is definitely, and it will be, I mean, this is not even just an issue in the developing world, right? In the United States, we have, the United States is a very dispersed country in a lot of low density areas. And those places, many of them do not have high speed internet. And as a result, businesses won't move to those areas, and even wealthy households won't buy in those areas because there's not this crucial piece of infrastructure. It's like, trying to buy a house and discovering it has no sewage or electricity. Well, at this point, a relatively high speed broadband is considered an essential service. So yes, I do think that is critical, because it is, like many pieces of infrastructure, it's something you build on top of, right? And if you don't have that infrastructure, there's a lot of other things that cannot be constructed.
Exactly.
So yes, I think that's a worthy investment.
Right. So I think, I mean, in the economy of the future, as we move forward, I think just like how the United States, I think in the 1940s, built the interstate highway, which kind of opened up the country, which was not possible prior to that. The digital infrastructure will open up what we call the digital space, right, for countries to operate in. And if you don't have it, you will not be competitive. You will not attract new jobs, new investments that will create new jobs.
I mean, you may attract some jobs and investment, but they're not going to be the same ones.
Right.
Some of them might just be extractive things. We'll go in and, grab the trees or grab the oil or whatever,
right.
But it's not going to be the same type of work.
Right.
So yes, you do. And the great advantage now, of course, and this is an advantage of not being the first mover on technology, the initial waves of building those things are extremely expensive, right? Most of the US is wired with, telephone wire.
Yes.
Which you wouldn't build anymore, right? Most countries will never build a central landline system.
Yes.
They will use, microwave transmission and radio waves to accomplish the same goal. And so that can be done much more cheaply and much more effectively. And it's much more valuable because it doesn't have close substitutes, right?
Right.
In a developed world, the mobile phone is great, but we had television and we had newspapers, right? And we had libraries, we had all kinds of access to information. The mobile, digital, broadband and mobile telephony bring information rapidly into less developed areas in a way where there was nothing like it beforehand. So yeah, I think that it's hard to see. It's hard to, there are many things that I would just say, well, you don't know if that's a good investment, you need to care. But in general, I think building digital infrastructure at this point at reasonable prices is invaluable to almost every country on earth.
Right. David, we have a lot of participants who are either college students at the moment or parents who have college-going children. And one of the biggest question marks is, what should they be studying in college? Or rather, what kind of knowledge should they be pursuing? There's this, how we learn to read and write today in the past, and people are now saying that, to have any sort of a well-paying job in the future, you need to know coding. So coding becomes a language just like English. It becomes the language that you will have to have. As a professor, and of course, as MIT, how do you see that in terms of college degrees? Will they still be relevant or going forward? Because there is a thinking that, you just do short courses today. You don't need to do a 4-year degree anymore, right? How do you see that playing out?
Good. Okay. So first of all, I don't agree. A lot of people say, and I don't agree with the claim that coding is the essential skill of the future. Just like, the fact that everybody drives a car doesn't mean everybody needs to be an automobile mechanic. It's a piece of the infrastructure, but it's not the main thing that everybody does. And in the future, most people will not be working in software. What is essential, right? If you say, well, what are the essential human skills? They are, expertise, judgment, and creativity. right? So human beings have incredible adaptability and incredible ability to flexibly use knowledge in new situations. So what I mean by that, expertise is kind of a body of knowledge that you master, whether it's medicine or law or engineering, or advertising. Judgment is knowing how to apply that knowledge, right? So it's not enough for me to just, read case law online and, to be a lawyer, I have to know when to use the right precedent, when to advance the right argument, when, what procedures to follow, right? So it's more than just access to data. I need to have knowledge that leads to judgment. And then creativity is taking knowledge and judgment from one domain and applying it to a new problem. And these are things that people are incredibly good at, but of course it takes investment, right? You have to master things and develop judgment. As we do that, right, those things are useful in all kinds of domains that are not just technology. They're useful in education. They're useful in caring for others, in managing, communication skills and leadership, and the ability to write, to present, to articulate. These are more valuable than ever. So, what should people pursue as a career? You look at something, work that uses human judgment and expertise and is complemented by technology. That doesn't mean being a technology developer. It means something where the tools are improving so you can become more productive over time. Will college become unnecessary? I don't know. Education will become more important, not less important. Whether it occurs through traditional colleges or elsewhere, I'm not sure. I'm happy to see colleges become less important, because they're expensive and they're slow, right? I would like to see education become more democratic, more entertaining, right? Cheaper, more accessible. And some of that is already happening. So I think it's an open question what the institutional structure will be. I am certain that education and skills will become more important, not less important. I'm sure that the technologies are changing and that education is going to get better for this reason, right? Education has been an incredibly lagging technology. It's going to be more fun. It's going to be more hands-on because we use more virtual reality and augmented reality, not just like studying in a classroom. It's going to be more accessible because it will be on demand, and it's going to be cheaper for the same reason. So I think that we are entering a new era, but it still be the case that education will never be easy. People will have to work hard to master skills. If it were easy, it wouldn't be scarce. If it wasn't scarce, it wouldn't be valuable. So there's a lot of opportunity there. Things are changing, and I think they're changing for the better. What they'll look like, I don't know yet.
Right. I think you make a very good point. I think education is so paramount and critical to knowledge and to gaining that body of knowledge, right? And a lot of universities, like you said, the structure of the university is still very 19th century, right? You go to class.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 4-year degree. It's so structured that way, right? Today you have online courses, mushrooming everywhere. Universities are offering free online courses, but very short-term courses. Do you see a hybrid education system evolving and accelerated by the pandemic? Because, especially foreign students who used to go to the universities in the West, cannot travel anymore, but they still want to have that access to that world-class education, right? And those universities still need those students. So there must be some meeting point somewhere where universities says, okay, let's come up with a new hybrid system. Is that going to accelerate too?
Oh, for sure. And it already is. I mean, I'll give you one example from MIT. My colleagues, Esther Duflo, Abhijit Banerjee, and Ben Olken. Esther and Abhijit won the Nobel Prize in economics last year. Ben Olken is actually someone who spends a lot of time working in Indonesia. Over the last few years, they set up a hybrid degree model at MIT in data, economics, and development policy. And the way it works is there's 2 years of online coursework that's available for free through MITx, the MIT extension program. And these are really challenging courses taught by MIT faculty with difficult tests, and they're great actually, and my daughters did them. And you can take those, and for a small fee, you can take them for credit, and you will be tested at a testing center and monitored. And then if you do that, you'll be issued what's called a MicroMaster's degree from MIT. It's from MIT-X. However, the top students in that program can qualify to come to MIT for another semester, do one residential semester, and receive a master's degree from MIT. We have students from all over the world, right? From Indonesia, from Mongolia, from India, from Pakistan, who've entered that program. And these are people who would never have had the opportunity to qualify and show their credentials. There's so much talent in the world, so much talent. And often our systems they're designed from a low information environment where very little was known, right? So why are universities structured the way they are? Well, you had to be where all the books were, and all the professors had to be near all the students. And why were those students chosen who were there? Well, we didn't know about many students. We couldn't assess how good they were. And so we just went to the top high schools and so on. It was all designed around a world that wasn't very connected and where physical proximity was very important. But we are now in a world where so much more can be learned and shared. And, I strongly, strongly believe that there is no scarcity of talent in the world, that there are brilliant and creative people absolutely everywhere. What's often missing is investment in those people, opportunity, and knowledge of who has the capacity. And those are barriers that we're breaking down. And so I think, education. So I do think, that universities 20 years from now, elite universities, are going to look quite different. MIT and all these top universities, they haven't grown their student population in decades, right? They're not getting physically bigger, but now that's no longer relevant. They can get intellectually much bigger. And I think that's a fabulous opportunity, because the biggest barrier in education has been cost. And that is a barrier that we're going to be breaking down.
Right. So in essence, it's the real democratization of higher education. And you're opening it up to millions and millions of more people who would never have been able to access that kind of education.
Absolutely.
Right. Let me just check. We have one last question in terms of how AI, machine learning, and robotics could impact low-skilled labor, especially in countries like Indonesia, as manufacturing companies automate. You mentioned that earlier in your early part of the presentation, but I think it's also a good way to close, because this is where countries like Indonesia really grapple with in terms of the future work. Right. It's not a high skill level, because those people can look after themselves. It's really the low skill. How do you transition? What kind of skills should they be looking to acquire?
Yeah, good. I think it's a good question. And I think that, the skills that are important are very foundational, right? They're literacy, they're numeracy, right? They're, basic mathematics and analytic and reasoning capability. And then those need to be complemented by development policies that attract investment, that build on infrastructure. And I agree that there are certain types of work that it's hard to see that people will be competitive in them long term. I do think a lot of work in textiles, for example, or sewing, and will eventually be automated. And so it is true. Now, it's still the case, even where that's true, there will still be physical factories, and there'll still be people who work, and maintain those machines, who provide the transportation service, the electrification, right, the materials moving, and so on. So I don't think that's all going to go away. And where countries build those things is an open question, right? It doesn't necessarily, a lot of people talk about reshoring, that rich countries will do everything on their own soil because they have the robots. I don't know that that's true. It's not obvious to me that that's true. There may be still many advantages to doing things in other parts of the world. But I do think what makes a country an attractive place to do those things is partly about the skills that the people have, and just as importantly is about the institutions that make that country a good business environment, or good environment, right? Rule of law, lack of corruption, good infrastructure, a legal system where people can enforce contracts, where things are transparent, and of course, access to roads, access to electricity, access to information, access to ports, right? Take, just across the waterway, take the country of Singapore, right? It has very little natural advantage other than its location, right? What it has is a good set of institutions. And those things are very sticky. They're very hard to replicate. It's very hard to create a country that is, that has a low level of corruption, a high level of human capital, good infrastructure, and a high level of trust. When you get that, it makes it, Singapore is an incredibly expensive place to do business. And yet many companies want to be there because those human-built assets are so essential. But that's not just true of rich countries. That's true of developing countries as well. Indonesia has many assets as not just a beautiful place, but a place that has, that is it's a country that of much goodwill, of high levels of trust, and many things that makes it feasible for it to grow rapidly and take advantage of its location, of its people, right, and of the opportunities in the neighborhood. And so that does require investment, and it's not just making people skilled, it's making the whole democratic infrastructure and market structure work well. And that is feasible. And it's not just an individual choice, it's a collective choice. But I'm optimistic that there's great opportunity there.
Well, Professor Autor, thank you so much for your time. And I think I've learned a lot from this session, deep insights, and I think really giving the perspective on the future of work, because it's become a cliche, the future of work, but nobody really quite understands what that means. And I think your presentation today at the Indonesia Economic Forum has really helped us to crystallize some of these ideas and open up new insights into how things are going to evolve going forward. Certain things are still very critical to an economy, as you mentioned, institutions, infrastructure, a great education system that delivers strong basic education on which you can build. So we really appreciate your time and your insights. I know it's very early in the morning for you, but but it has been a very invigorating dialogue with you, Professor David Autor.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I only wish I could be here in person, but anyway, this is a terrific forum, and congratulations to you for putting it together, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and hopefully sometime down the road we'll have the honor of hosting you physically in Indonesia at the
I'll look forward to that.
Thank you very much. That was Professor. Thank you. That was Professor David Autor from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology from Boston, Massachusetts. We have come to the end of our program today, but we still have 2 more days of very engaging, very invigorating dialogue with some great speakers. Stay with us. Go to www.indonesiaeconomicforum.com for the latest updates on the program. We will start again tomorrow at 10 a.m. Please log on early so that to ensure that you get your space. We've had some very great, good speakers today. This is the 7th Indonesia Economic Forum. We are virtual, we are global, and we are going to be providing more great insights for you. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
di mana shock dari COVID ini betul-betul memukul dan kemampuan kita untuk mengcounternya tidak bisa menetralisir cukup besar.
Memprioritaskan kesehatan bukan berarti mengorbankan ekonomi. Sekali lagi, kita harus mencari keseimbangan yang pas.
Things are looking up. Your business is growing. So what's your next step? A bigger office? A new supplier? Your next big contract overseas? Your business has growing needs. You'll need more support, more flexibility, more resources, and a bank that makes it their business to help expand your business. Welcome to Business Banking with HSBC. All our experience and expertise brought right to you so that you and your business can take the next step. You'll have support from a dedicated relationship manager and access to our global network of experts. The flexibility to manage your finances across multiple devices. International accounts all on one platform. And much more. So choose Business Banking with HSBC and take your next step.